November 14, 1961, 11:47 p.m. A ledger lies open. A phantom line added, and Bumpy Johnson waits in a quiet office as Harlem holds its breath. The ledger lay open on the metal desk like it had been left mid-breath. Not slammed, not hidden, just open, paper flat, spine relaxed, ink settled. Bumpy Johnson stood without touching it. The office was small and clean in the way places become when mistakes are supposed to look organized. Filing cabinets flush to the wall, a desk lamp angled too carefully, a window facing Lenox Avenue that showed only reflection at night. Elias Green sat across from him, hands folded, elbows hovering. He had not been told to sit. He had sat because standing felt dishonest. The ledger belonged to him. That mattered. Bumpy let the room keep its shape. No packing, no clearing of the throat. He read without reading, eyes passing over columns as if numbers could feel watched. Outside, two men stood near the doorway downstairs. Not guards, not threats, just presence. One smoked, one didn't. Their stillness pressed lightly against the building, enough to be noticed, not enough to be explained. That was the risk, not danger awareness. Elias shifted once. The chair made a sound. He stopped moving after that. Bumpy finally placed a finger on the page, not tapping, resting. A line near the bottom sat darker than the rest. Same handwriting, different weight, added later. The ink hadn't learned the rhythm of the book yet. "Coffee still warm," Elias said. Bumpy didn't look up. He turned the page slowly, then back again, as if confirming the book agreed with itself. The ledger was the kind that closed every morning without argument. That was Elias' reputation. Clean books, no noise, no favors. Tonight there was noise. It just hadn't spoken yet. Bumpy closed the ledger halfway, not enough to hide anything, just enough to change the air. "The night clerk didn't log the receipt," Elias said, quickly, then quieter. "I corrected it." Bumpy's voice was calm, level, almost bored. "You corrected what wasn't broken." Silence filled the sentence like a period. The desk lamp hummed. Outside, the smoker exhaled. Elias nodded once, a reflex. He had spent years nodding at numbers, not men. The ledger stayed half-closed, waiting. Bumpy didn't accuse. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. Those were loud questions. Loud questions invite answers that argue. He asked the only one that didn't. "When do the books close?" Elias swallowed. "Morning," he said, "before sunrise." That was the deadline, not urgent, not announced. It simply existed. Bumpy stood there, letting the ledger hold its place in the room. An object didn't need permission to be heavy. He turned toward the window just enough to show Elias his reflection over Bumpy's shoulder. Two men in the glass, one smoking, one not. "Fixing things late," Bumpy said, still not facing him, "has a way of becoming permanent." Elias nodded again, slower this time. Bumpy reached out and closed the ledger fully. The sound was soft, final without being finished. "Leave it open," he said. It wasn't a command. It didn't need to be. Elias slid the ledger back, spine straightened, pages exposed. The darker line sat there, patient. Bumpy moved toward the door. "One last thing," spoken without turning. "Books remember." He stepped out into the hallway. Footsteps receded. The men downstairs didn't move. Elias was alone with the ledger, and the morning that would arrive whether he was ready or not. If the line stayed, what would close with it? Elias did not move for a long moment. The ledger stayed where it was, open to the page that refused to blend in. The darker line seemed to breathe now that it had been noticed. Ink always behaved differently once it was seen. He reached for a pencil, then stopped. Pencils implied uncertainty. This was not that kind of night. Outside, a car passed. Tires whispered against damp pavement. Harlem carried on without consulting the office. Elias turned the page carefully, then back again. He wanted to be sure the line hadn't changed while he wasn't looking. It hadn't. Numbers rarely move on their own. They wait for hands. He stood, walked to the filing cabinet, opened it, and stared inside without touching anything. The cabinet smelled of paper and dust and old discipline. This was where truth went when it wanted to stay quiet. The ledger didn't belong in the cabinet yet. It wasn't finished speaking. Elias returned to the desk and sat. He loosened his tie, not for comfort but for honesty. Tight things pretend they are holding something together. He read the phantom expense again. The amount wasn't large. That was the insult. Big numbers announce themselves. Small ones expect to be forgiven. Someone had assumed he would forgive it. He glanced at the clock. The hands moved without urgency. There would be no countdown. Morning didn't threaten. It arrived. Elias thought about his office the way it looked during the day. Clean, quiet, trusted. People stepped inside and believed things would come out balanced. That belief was worth more than the furniture. He picked up the pen. The ink matched the book this time. Same weight, same rhythm. He drew a clean line through the entry, not scribbled, not erased, corrected. He wrote a note in the margin. Brief, factual, no defense. Explanations age badly. The ledger felt lighter, once the page agreed with itself again. Elias closed the book and stood. He walked to the window and looked down. The man with the cigarette was gone. The other leaned against the wall, eyes forward, not watching anything in particular. Presence didn't require supervision. Elias returned to the desk and opened the ledger once more. He checked his work the way he always did. Slowly. Once. Twice. A third time, not because he doubted it, but because habit was how offices survived. Satisfied, he closed the book. This time, the sound meant something. He placed the ledger in his briefcase and snapped it shut. The latch clicked. A small sound, decisive. Elias turned off the desk lamp. Darkness filled the room evenly. No corner hid more than another. That felt right. At the door, he paused and looked back once. The desk looked smaller without the book, ordinary, replaceable. He locked the office and stepped into the hallway. Morning would open the books again. Copies would be made. Questions would form quietly without anyone raising a voice. Bumpy Johnson would not need to return. Elias descended the stairs alone, the briefcase steady at his side. Each step felt measured, like a column settling into place. By sunrise, the ledger would say exactly what it meant. The office would still close on time. But once the numbers spoke in daylight, who would they point to when silence was no longer enough? The office looked different in daylight. Not cleaner, not messier, just exposed. Sunlight flattened the room, stripped it of the shadows that had done so much work the night before. The desk showed its scratches. The filing cabinets lost their authority. Even the chair looked tired. Elias arrived early. He always did now. The ledger sat on the desk, closed, centered, aligned with the blotter as if it had been measured. Copies had been made. Carbon paper lay discarded in the bin, its job finished, its purpose fulfilled without ceremony. At 9 sharp, the door opened. Bumpy Johnson stepped in alone. No coat, no hat, just presence trimmed down to what was necessary. He did not look around. He did not sit. He stood where the light reached him evenly. Elias stood as well, not from fear, from recognition. Bumpy nodded once, that was all. The ledger remained closed between them, like a third party that had already made up its mind. "You brought it," Bumpy said. "Yes," Elias replied. Bumpy didn't ask for it, he waited. Elias placed the ledger on the desk and slid it forward. The movement was careful, almost respectful, not offering, returning. Bumpy rested his palm on the cover, flat, still. He didn't open it yet. Outside, Harlem moved through its morning rituals. Deliveries, footsteps, voices that didn't know they were walking past a finished decision. "This is the last copy," Elias said. Bumpy looked at him for the first time. "Last is a strong word," he said. Elias nodded. He had learned that. Bumpy opened the ledger. Pages turned slowly. No hurry, no suspicion, just confirmation. The darker line was gone. In its place, a clean correction. A note in the margin, short, final. The book now sounded like itself again. Bumpy closed it. "Good," he said. It wasn't praise. It wasn't relief. It was acknowledgement, the way a judge acknowledges a verdict already reached. Elias exhaled, though he didn't realize he had been holding anything. "There will be questions," Elias said. Bumpy adjusted the ledger's position, squared it with the desk. "Questions are fine," he replied. "They end." Elias hesitated. This was the moment he would remember later, the one where he could have stayed quiet and survived just the same. Instead, he spoke. "It wasn't my idea." Bumpy's eyes stayed on the ledger. "I know," he said. The truth surfaced without force. No names spoken, no defenses raised, just an understanding placed gently on the table between them. Elias swallowed. "That doesn't change where it lands," Bumpy continued. "It just changes how long it takes." Silence returned, not heavy, settled. Bumpy picked up the ledger and turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. "You did what books are supposed to do," he said. "They tell the truth when people stop trying to." He left without another word. Elias sat back down, alone with the sunlight and an empty desk. By afternoon, the office would still be open. But the numbers had already finished speaking. When the questions came, would anyone remember who taught them how to end? The door closed softly behind Bumpy Johnson. Not careful, not deliberate, just finished. Elias remained standing for a few seconds after the sound faded. Offices had a way of echoing decisions long after the people left. This one did it politely. He sat. The desk felt wider without the ledger, lighter, almost dishonest. Elias opened a drawer and removed a thin folder. No label, no color. The kind of folder meant to disappear into systems without resistance. He placed it where the ledger had been and opened it. Inside were copies, clean, accurate, ordinary. That was the danger. Ordinary things moved fastest. He reviewed them once, twice. A third time, not for certainty, but for ritual. Rituals reminded men who they were when pressure thinned their judgment. At 10:30, the first call came. A voice from uptown, calm, curious. Elias answered with facts only. Dates, totals, page numbers, no tone. Tone invited interpretation. The voice paused longer than expected. "That line was there last week," the caller said. "Yes," Elias replied. "It shouldn't have been." Another pause. "And now?" "Now it is." The call ended without disagreement. That was new. By noon there were 3 more, each shorter than the last, each ending the same way. No accusations, no raised volume, just acceptance delivered reluctantly, like paperwork no one wanted to file but knew they had to. Elias ate lunch at his desk. Cold sandwich. No appetite. He wasn't nervous. He was attentive. Those were different conditions. He watched the clock without counting it. Time passed like it always did when no one chased it. Mid-afternoon brought a visit. A man in a gray suit. No briefcase. No introduction. He stood near the door and looked around, taking inventory of the space the way men do when they're measuring usefulness. Elias didn't offer a chair. "You corrected an entry," the man said. "Yes." "Late." "Yes." The man nodded. He didn't ask who told him to. He already knew the answer would disappoint him. "That creates exposure," the man said. Elias folded his hands on the desk. Exposure only matters when something, being hidden. The man studied him longer this time. Then he smiled thinly. "You won't last long doing that." Elias met his eyes. "I wasn't planning to." The smile faded. The man left without shaking hands. When the door closed, Elias felt something settle. Not relief, alignment. By 5, the phone stopped ringing. The office quieted into its usual shape. Safe, predictable, finished. Elias stood, straightened the desk, and locked the filing cabinet. He turned off the lamp even though there was still light. Habits mattered. As he reached for his coat, he paused. He removed the key from his pocket and set it in the drawer instead. The office would open tomorrow. But not for him. As he stepped into the hallway, he didn't look back. Some decisions close more than books. They close paths. And once truth has been allowed to sit in the open, who would choose to return to rooms built to keep it out? The office opened the next morning without Elias. That alone was enough to change the air. The desk remained where it had always been. The chair still faced it. The filing cabinets stood aligned, their labels neat, their drawers obedient. But the habit was gone. The room knew it before anyone said it out loud. A junior clerk unlocked the door. He paused, sensing something missing he could not name. He stepped inside anyway. People always do. By mid-morning, the ledger had moved. Not carried with ceremony, not escorted. It passed through hands the way documents do when they've been declared clean. Copied, filed, logged, reduced to reference. Bumpy Johnson did not touch it again. He sat that afternoon in a quiet bar several blocks south, sunlight slipping in sideways, dust floating like it had time to think. A glass rested in front of him, untouched. He listened more than he spoke. A man mentioned the accountant's office. Closed early yesterday, he said. Lights were off before dinner. Bumpy nodded once. Nothing else was said. Power didn't need follow-up. It moved on. Elsewhere, Elias walked through Harlem with no briefcase, no destination, just distance. He passed his own building and didn't look up. That was the hardest part, leaving without checking what stayed behind. He stopped at a cafe he'd never entered before, sat near the window, watched people carry things that mattered only to them. The ledger was no longer his concern. That was the consequence. Once truth left your hands, it didn't belong to you again. In the office, the junior clerk found the drawer with the spare key. He hesitated before opening it. Inside, the key lay exactly where Elias had placed it. No note, no instruction. Just an absence that felt deliberate. The clerk closed the drawer. He understood enough to stop asking questions. That evening, the office closed on time. The lights went dark evenly. No one stayed late to fix anything. Across the city, conversations adjusted, accounts aligned. Small favors lost their hiding places. No names were spoken. Bumpy finished his drink and stood. He left a bill on the bar, more than necessary, less than generous, balanced. The ledger sat somewhere official now, stamped and quiet. And with it settled, something else shifted. If an office could close without noise, what else could disappear the same way once judgment had already passed? By the second day, the absence had a shape. People learned where not to step. Calls that once went to Elias rerouted themselves, not officially, just naturally. Numbers found new homes, questions shortened. The city adjusted the way it always did when a door stopped opening. The junior clerk worked quietly. He followed procedures without embellishment. When he found inconsistencies, he flagged them and moved on. No corrections after hours. No private fixes. The ledger had taught the room how to behave. A supervisor stopped by midweek. He stood longer than necessary, reading nothing in particular. "Green coming back?" he asked. The clerk shook his head. "No notice." "No." The supervisor nodded. He did not press. Men in his position learned when silence had already been approved. Outside, rain came down light and steady. It washed nothing away. It just confirmed the season. Elias spent his days walking. He learned which streets he preferred without purpose. He learned how long a cup of coffee could last when you didn't have to return anywhere. He did not feel chased. He felt released. That was unfamiliar. At night, he slept without setting an alarm. That alone told him the decision had been final. Bumpy Johnson heard small updates without asking. A closed office, clean books, no fallout. The kind of outcome that didn't attract attention because nothing exploded. That was the point. He passed the building once in the evening, riding in the back seat, window cracked. The lights were on, different faces inside. The work continued. He looked away before the car stopped. What mattered had already happened. By Friday, the ledger's copies had reached the places that kept records forever. No margin notes, no fingerprints, just truth filed like it belonged. The junior clerk locked up early. He turned the sign to closed and hesitated, hands still on the glass. It felt heavier than before. He stepped away. Across town, Elias folded his coat and placed it on a chair he did not own. He left it there. Another habit discarded. Bumpy stood on a quiet corner later that night, watching traffic thin. Harlem settled into itself, as it always did. Judgment had finished its work without needing applause. When an office closes the right way, it teaches the rest of the city how to stay open. And once absence becomes instruction, who would dare reopen a door that silence itself has already sealed? The office settled into routine without ceremony. New hands learned old rules quickly. Desks were wiped at the end of the day. Drawers closed fully. Nothing stayed unfinished after dark. The building didn't need reminders. It remembered what had happened there. The ledger remained elsewhere now. Not lost, not hidden, filed, stamped, reduced to reference the way powerful things often are once they've done their work. Its weight lingered in absence, shaping behavior without being present. Elias did not return. He took a temporary room on the west side, furnished lightly, nothing that implied permanence. A bed, a chair, a table that never held more than a cup. He woke without urgency. Mornings arrived gently when they weren't chased. He counted less now, not because he couldn't, because he didn't need to. Each afternoon he walked the same route, not out of habit but out of respect for the day. He learned where the sun paused on certain corners, which streets stayed quiet longest, how long it took before no one expected anything from him. That was the consequence, not loss, distance. Bumpy Johnson heard the city absorb it all without friction. No one complained loudly. No one asked the wrong questions. That told him enough. He sat one evening in a back booth, jacket folded beside him. Someone mentioned the accountant again, casually, as if testing whether the name still carried weight. Closed his office, the man said, just walked away. Bumpy stirred his drink once. Some doors, he said, close themselves. The man nodded, unsure why he felt corrected. Bumpy didn't explain. Explanations invite revision. Later, walking alone, he passed the building again. The windows reflected streetlight cleanly now. No shadows lingering. No figures staying late to adjust anything quietly. He didn't slow down. Across the city, Elias adopted a new habit. Every evening he wrote a single line in a small notebook. Not numbers, observations. What the day had offered without asking for return. One line, then the book closed. The ledger had taught him that endings didn't need witnesses. They needed agreement. And once a life aligns itself with that truth, what would it take to convince it to reopen accounts already settled? The city moved on the way cities do, when nothing is officially wrong. Stores opened, offices unlocked. Men carried papers that mattered only until they didn't. Harlem kept its rhythm, steady enough to hide the moments that had already decided its shape. The accountant's office became ordinary. That was the final proof. Windows cleaned, furniture rearranged, a different name on the door. No one asked what had been there before. That was how permanence worked here. Elias stopped writing in his notebook. Not because he forgot, because the habit had finished its work. He no longer needed to account for days that asked nothing of him. Silence had become sufficient record. One afternoon he passed a stationery shop and paused. In the window sat a ledger like the one he had carried for years. Same thickness, same spine, blank pages waiting for discipline. He didn't go inside. Some tools don't need replacing once they've taught you what they were for. Bumpy Johnson heard weeks later that the corrected numbers had closed a small circle. A man lost access. Another found himself suddenly careful. Nothing dramatic followed. No celebrations. No warnings. That was judgment doing its work quietly. Bumpy adjusted his routines without noticing. He stopped visiting one corner. He stopped waiting in certain rooms. When things ended properly, they didn't ask to be remembered. One night he sat alone, coat on, drink untouched. He thought of the ledger only briefly. Not the ink, not the line, the moment it had been left open. That was the lesson. You didn't need force to make truth speak. You just had to stop closing it too early. Elias watched evening settle from a bench near the river. He owned less now. He slept better. The city passed him without demand. The office door downtown locked each night at the same hour. No one stayed late. No one corrected things quietly. Absence had become the rule. That was the consequence the ledger left behind. Not fear, not loyalty. Precision. If a single line corrected in silence can change a room forever, how many lives are shaped by books that were never left open long enough to be judged?